This is what Cody Rhodes looked like tonight for his match against Seth Rollins. And in this video, we're going to talk about just how insane this is. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and in this video, we're going to be talking all about what's going on here with Cody Rhodes. Now, I'll say right off the bat, if things look a little bit different here with the scene, I'm filming in a different location. We've got a green screen back here, so if things kind of intermittently cut out or look funny, that's why. But let's talk about what in the world is going on here with Cody Rhodes and his right pec. Well, the word, of course, is that Rhodes suffered a pec rupture, basically a complete tear of the tendon of his pectoralis major muscle off of the bone. And what we're seeing here on his skin is all of the bruising. We call it ecchymosis. That's the kind of medical term for bruising because of the bleeding that occurs whenever that tendon snaps off of the bone. Now, we don't have footage of the mechanism here, but the report is that he injured it during a training workout and then basically completed the rupture while doing some bench press. And that's typically how these injuries occur. Essentially, whenever you bench press and your arm kind of goes downward, as your arm lowers, you stretch the pec tendon and you eccentrically load it, meaning the tendon is trying to contract with the muscle while it's being pulled as you descend downward. Eventually, the force becomes too great for the tendon, and in Cody's case, there's already a partial injury, and you get that complete snap or rupture of the tendon coming off of the bone. There's a couple of clues beyond just the bruising that point to what is actually going on with the injury. Number one, you can often see a little bit of flattening or loss of sort of the contour of the pec muscle whenever the rupture is there. Now, interestingly, if you feel up in the chest where the pec tendon inserts, you oftentimes can still feel a bit of a tendon. And so if we don't see the bruising, these can actually be really tough to see clinically. And sometimes they go on chronic and people don't really even appreciate that they have the injury. But here we can see the obvious bruising so we know what's really going on. The other thing we'll sometimes see is where one of the nipples looks lower than the uninjured side. And so here, while he's not directly head on, this right nipple is going to be dropped down a little bit compared to the left side because of how we've lost that pec muscle beneath the skin. In the actual clip of him wrestling, we can see that a little bit better, where it looks like the right nipple is maybe dropped down a little bit, and then we see loss of this normal contour here of where that pec muscle is going to live. Now, the reason why we see all this bruising down the front of the arm is because the pec tendon actually inserts on the humerus. It inserts out on the arm bone. And so whenever it ruptures, that bleeding extends both down the humerus, down the arm, but then also across the chest because of how the tendon and the muscle retract. Looking at our biodigital anatomy tool here, I've highlighted the two pec muscles. Of course, we have a pec major and a pec minor. The pec major is the big one that we typically think about. That's kind of the workhorse, the power muscle. And you can see how it originates off of the ribs in the front of the chest and then sort of does this kind of wrapping maneuver before it goes down and ultimately inserts onto the humerus or the arm bone. But you can see how it doesn't insert on the chest. It inserts on the humerus out here. And so that's why whenever we see these pec ruptures, that bruising on the skin extends all the way down the arm because the actual insertion of that tendon is out there on the arm bone. Beneath the pec major, we have a muscle called the pec minor. And this one actually originates from the ribs, but it's going to insert up on the shoulder blade or the scapula. So two pec muscles, pec major, pec minor. In this case, it's the pec major that we see ruptured. And I will say this all looks very real. The bruising pattern looks completely legit. The color distribution looks completely legit. So I don't think there's anything about this that looks artificial, like it's just makeup that was made to sort of build up the story. This looks like a very complete, legitimate injury, just like what we would see when the pec ruptures. So now the big question, right? Everybody wants to know who in the world this doctor was that cleared Rhodes to go out there and wrestle. They're, of course, calling him heroic for being out there, and I'd agree. And this gets into a little bit of a tricky conversation because on one hand, when the pec tendon is completely ruptured, you're not going to necessarily make that individual injury any worse whenever you go out there and wrestle. It's already ruptured. You already know you need an operation, and so you're not really going to make that worse in and of itself. The bigger thing is going to be the pain. It's going to be the limitations in the function and the range of motion. The nice thing, if this happened more recently, he probably hasn't stiffened up enough yet to truly be affected by the range of motion. It's really going to be a pain question. The bigger concern, though, is whenever you have pain in one part of the body from an injury, you start to compensate. And so then Rhodes opens himself up to, say, shoulder injuries, to rotator cuff injury possibilities, because of how he might be compensating from the pec rupture. And so I'm sure in this situation, the doctors would have advised him not to wrestle, but at the end of the day, sometimes this comes down to the athlete understanding the risks of what they choose to go out there and do. And in this case, Rhodes is accepting those risks of having another injury. The pec muscle is going to functionally be adducting the arm, so bringing it closer in towards the body, and then also flexing the arm forward, so kind of lifting it up. But you have other muscles that can help compensate. And so if Rhodes can go out there and he can functionally do what he needs to do to wrestle, and it's just a pain question, then I can see them being a little bit more comfortable with him going back out there and wrestling. But to be honest, at the end of the day, it really is just a discussion of the risks and benefits. And when you're in a sport like professional wrestling, there's a different balance there between what people might be willing to tolerate. It's still pretty crazy to see him out there doing this. And while personally I would advise him not to be wrestling, you can't necessarily say that somebody is being like grossly negligent or necessarily harmful. We don't truly know the full story about his function and what he might be willing to accept with the risks of going back out there. The toughness here is undeniable, and hopefully he makes it through this unscathed. And like I said, when you have a pec rupture like this, you're headed towards surgery anyways, and so you're not going to make that individual injury worse. It's what you set yourself up for other injuries, and that's really hard to predict. But if he has good function, if he's able to do what he needs to do, then it's not necessarily as risky as somebody who can't even move their arm or do their basic activities. That's it for the video, everybody. I hope this was educational to take a look at some of the pec anatomy and talk about this truly unique situation that we certainly don't see very often in everyday sports. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.